Salute, BookTube. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. Well, what a momentous week it's been. Not even a week, just a couple of days that it's been. Just a massive escalation here in the Middle East region where I'm based. I really didn't want to make videos, just not in the mood. Uh, so I'm pushing myself to do this. I've got my monthly wrap up, which I usually do at the end of the month. I do a monthly wrap up of what I've read, and then a couple of days later, I do my TBR for March, what I plan to read in March. Maybe I'll combine it in this video. I don't know, because I really don't want to make any more videos. I'm just depressed, just very, very depressed. Not scared, not none of that. Just depressed um, at the state of the world and how we let things reach this point. On this channel, I talk about books. I read mostly nonfiction. I read mostly history. So politics does get into my videos, but I don't usually talk about the politics here, what's going on, and I don't want to. My videos usually they take 45 minutes of video, and if I start talking about politics and talking about what's happening in the Middle East, the video will go on for an hour, 2 hours, and none of you want to watch that. Um, so I don't really want to talk about the situation right now. I think there's enough news, um, enough social media for you or anybody watching this. You're probably getting bombarded, so there's no point really of me just talking and adding to it. It's just very sad. It's just very sad. Um, uh, I think I'll leave it at that and I'll go to the books. I don't even know if I'm gonna post this, but I'll try. Anyway, so for February, I read how much is this? 8 books. Three of them were really short. Um, but yeah, I thought I would talk about them here in this video. Uh, the first books I read, for those of you who follow my channel, I'm doing a year-long reading event, me myself. It's called America 250. This year is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So I thought I would read American history books about America. I'm reading American history books with Historathon. Anybody who knows America, I don't know if you can hear that in the background. uh, Anybody who knows about America, its history, most of its history really happens after 1500, so that's the second quarter of Historathon. Sorry, the third quarter of Historathon. So I've got quarter one and quarter two of Historathon to do whatever I want. Um, uh, so I decided, well, for quarter one, well, I'll talk about the ancient history that I'm reading, but I think I'll keep that to the end. For America 250, the Historathon reading I want to do, like I said, starts in quarter three. So the first half of the year, I'm pretty much free to do or to read really whatever I want about America or American history. I have a couple of books that I want to get rid of that are American political science books that I have, and I read three of them this month. And it's well, let me show you the books. The first one is by Jeffrey D. Sachs, The Price of Civilization, Reawakening American Virtue and Prosperity. Yeah, good luck with that. The Price of Civilization. The other one is by Yuval Levin, The Fractured Republic. Renewing. So that one was reawakening. This one is renewing America's social contract in the age of individualism. And then The Age of American Unreason by Susan Jacoby. Jacobi. So if the first one, Jeffrey Sachs, comes from the left wing. This one by Yuval Levin comes from the right wing. I was gonna say when I was reading this that probably Suzanne Jacobi is somewhere in the middle, but after reading the book, she's definitely more on the left. Those were the books that I read. There was one thing I found. There were two similarities I found reading these three books almost simultaneously. Well, the first one is, or the first thing we should clear up is it's becoming clear now that 25 years of the 21st century has crossed us. The 20th century we can actually look back on now with a historical eye. The 20th century is officially history. And seeing American history, there are clear patterns that all three of these authors highlight in their books. It's quite clear that before the 1960s, let's say the first half of the 20th century, America was in a sort of, what's the word? A very conformist state, a very corporatist state. Here, Yuval Levin uses the word corporatist for the early 20th century. There's another book I read last month. This is by another right-winger. This is by Jonah Goldberg. He calls it liberal fascism. Sorry. Yuval Levin calls it corporatism. Jonah Goldberg calls it liberal fascism. And then, I mean, they're both right-wing, and right there, the blurb. Who's on the blurb? Nobody other than Jonah Goldberg. So this is the right wing of America. Just they blurb each other. They give each other high fives, slaps on the back. They drink at the same boring bars in Washington D.C. That's what they do. But anyway, so the first half of the 20th century was very much a corporatist system in America. Very much, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it fascistic. You want to call it corporatist. Very conformist. This is when unions and companies and the people they work together. Government and business and the employees via labor unions work together. That unraveled, and the second half of the American 20th century is one of, free markets. Ronald Reagan, they just pulled the plug on that whole system that had carried America through really golden years. And all three of these books, that's one similarity they have, is they talk about nostalgia. They all claim that the 50s and 60s was the American golden age, and then it went sour. And of course, they all have different reasons for why it goes sour. One is a left wing, one is right wing, and one is, I'd like to say centrist, but really they all have different reasons for it. And then what else did I want to say? Sorry, I'm a bit distracted. There was a second similarity that I saw in all three books. It was the use of the these are political scientists. The use of medical, like trying to find out what's wrong with America using medical approach, like a clinical approach. If we go, for example, if we go to the Jeffrey Sachs book, where is it? I've got the pages. If I can just, it says here. A macroeconomist, he's a macroeconomist, Jeffrey Sachs is. A macroeconomist faces the challenges of a clinical doctor who must help a patient with serious symptoms and an unknown and underlying disease. An effective response involves making a correct diagnosis about the underlying problem and then designing a treatment regimen to correct it. In my last book, The End of Poverty, I called this process clinical economics. My inspiration has been my wife, Sonia. a gifted medical doctor who showed me the wonders of science-based clinical medicine. It says here, having worked in and diagnosed dozens of economies over my career, I have come to have a good feel for the interplay of politics, economics, and society's values. Lasting economic solutions are found when all these components of social life are brought into a proper balance. Basically, he compares it to clinical analysis. And this book, he's an economist. There's a lot of graphs. It takes more of an economist's approach. If we go to the next book, which is Yuval Levin, The Fractured Republic, we see the same thing here. It says, this book begins from a widespread frustration, which I take to be a function in large part a failure of diagnosis, and so a failure of self-understanding. American life in the decades since the end of the World War II has not been on the whole a story of finding the right course and then falling away from it. We have actually held fairly steadily to something like a single complex but coherent trajectory, which has turned out to bring us progress at a cost. Again, the word diagnosis, right-winger, it has to be more optimistic because they pretty much controlled the country the second half of the 20th century. Ronald Reagan and Newt Gingrich, those sort of people. And then in the third book, Susan Jacoby, The Age of American Unreason, we also have, just find the page here, right at the beginning as well. It says, anti-intellectualism in any era can best be understood as a complex of symptoms with multiple causes, and the persistence of symptoms over time possesses the potential to turn a treatable, livable condition into a morbid disease affecting the entire body politic. So again, the use of medical terms, all three books, they just use it, and then there's one more similarity I found in all three books. This author, Jeffrey D. Sachs, this author, Yuval Levin, and then this author, Susan Jacoby. The similarity between all three authors, they're all American, but they're all Jewish. They're all Jewish American intellectuals looking at America. Jacoby, she mentions that America, especially in this second half of the 20th century, has always had a large Jewish intellectual movement. But they're all three of them are Jewish American. One of them is Israeli American, which is, whatever that means. But I just thought I would mention that. Anyway, we can go for the second part of my 2026 reading plan. Reading event just for me, is Russian Lit 2026. For that, I read two books of Russian literature. The first one is a very small book, a novella really, by Leo Tolstoy. This is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I read this in one sitting. It's very short. It's 100 pages. This Penguin Classics edition. But I couldn't put it down. Just excellent. 100 pages flew by. It really flew by. I was told that reading The Death of Ivan Ilyich would be a good primer for Tolstoy's bigger works. So this is like a warm-up, just a preparation. Perhaps I'll get to the longer ones. But if this is how Tolstoy writes, then now I know what all the fuss is about. And this is very well translated. The translator is Anthony Briggs. It was excellent. It just flowed. Excellent flow to the prose, to the translation of the original Russian. So I was very happy to read it, and it's about death. It's about death. It's 100 pages about death, and it really puts it into stark relief. Uh, yeah, it makes you think. It just makes you think. Uh, you know how precious life is, how nobody cares really um, if you're gonna die. Uh, the only person who cares about you is you, I guess. Uh, yeah, I thought it was great, and it's easy. Anybody can read this. Really, anybody. This should be taught in schools, but I don't know if such a morbid subject would be taught in schools, but should be maybe in universities, maybe not high schools, but universities. And then for Russian Lit 2026, my event to read Russian literature throughout the year 2026, I read this Mikhail Bulgakov, The Master and Margarita. Just I was like, why is there a cat on the cover? And then I read the book, and now I understand why there's a cat on the cover. Yeah, what to say about this? Just um, absurd, funny, uh, well paced. Um, I don't know what else to say. Fantastic. Uh, just an awesome, awesome reading experience. I don't know how much Bulgakov, what else he's written. Does he have anything comparable to this? But wow, this was fun. It was fun. It was certainly interesting. Interesting. I don't even know what I'm saying. It was. Yeah, I'm not very good at reviewing fiction books and discussing them, but this is a story about Moscow, really, in the 1930s, perhaps 1920s, 1930s. But it's also about um, God and the devil, right and wrong. Just again, these. It's a trend you're seeing in these Russian books. These Russian authors, they make you think. But it's got that magical realist element to it. If you've read, maybe it's not a fair comparison, but maybe Marquez, what's the book called? A hundred years of solitude. I don't even remember, but magical realism, basically. And this is very much so a lot of magic, not a lot of realism, more magic. But that didn't surprise me. Somebody who um, comes new to this would have been like, wow, this is absurd and it's totally unrealistic and this is really silly. If this is the first book of Russian literature you ever read, and it was close to being the first one I ever read, if it wasn't for Angelina, because just so I read this in February, in January, Angelina sent me this over Christmas. This is Russian Magical Tales from Pushkin to Platonov. So I read this in January. And reading this in January really prepared me, for lack of a better word, it prepared me for this. Um, because anybody who's read Russian magic tales and fairy tales, the oldest tales really in Russian, this wouldn't be as absurd, wouldn't be as crazy, wouldn't be as magical as you would think. So I'm sure Bulgakov or a lot of Russian literati or Russian bookish people are steeped in this kind of stuff, and it shows. It comes out here, and it's not as absurd as you think after you read this. But I don't want to give away too much of the plot. Just pick this up and read it. There's just one thing. This book, a lot of people, I was seeing like people talking about a critique, that this is a critique of Stalinist Russia. I didn't see that. Quite the opposite. I saw this as a Moscow comes out pretty good in this. At least Stalinist Moscow. It looks like a half decent place, if you ask me. And this is it's. There are snippets. There are a few, if you indulge me, a few quotes. this is chapter 18. It says here, um, from first class sleeping car number 9 of the Kiev train, on its arrival in Moscow, there alighted, among others, a decent looking passenger carrying a small fiberboard suitcase. This passenger was none other than the late Berliot's uncle, Maximilian Andreevich Poblavsky, an industrial economist who lived in Kiev on the former Institutsky Street. And then if I'm gonna paraphrase, but if we go on, it says, one secret about Maximilian Andreevich ought to be revealed. There is no arguing that he felt sorry for his wife's nephew who had died in the bloom of his life, but of course, being a practical man, he realized that there was no special need for his presence at the funeral, and nevertheless, Maximilian Andreevich was in great haste to go to Moscow. What was the point? The point was the apartment. An apartment in Moscow is a serious thing. For unknown reason, Maximilian Andreevich did not like Kiev and thought of moving to Moscow. And the thought of moving to Moscow had been gnawing at him so much lately that he had even begun to sleep badly. Well, I know about sleeping badly recently, but it says, and the thought of moving to Moscow had been gnawing at him so much lately that he had even begun to sleep badly. It goes on to say how much he dislikes Kiev, but then he says he wanted none of it, none of Kiev. He wanted only one thing, to move to Moscow. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him, because this Moscow that is described here has good Medicare, good healthcare facilities, where you're treated quite well, with excellent facilities. There's a very vibrant theater life. There's a very vibrant intellectual and literary life with poets and editors and all kinds of newspaper people, nice literary clubs with good restaurants, decent food, decent apartments if you had money, obviously. But yeah, just not as bad as this made in America McCarthyite anti-Stalinist propaganda that has been, it's just rife, really. There's another one about Moscow. It's if I can find it here really quickly. Yeah, it's at the end when the master. I don't want to spoil, but it's just where he says. He says, "I want to bid farewell to the city." The master cried to Azazello, who rode at their head. Without giving too much away, just saying that as they were supposed to go somewhere, he said, "Wait, I want to take one." They want to leave Moscow. He says, "No, I want to take one last look at Moscow." And it goes on. They have trouble getting the master to say goodbye to Moscow. One of them whistles at him, "Come on, let's go, let's go." He doesn't hear it. Of course, in absurdist fashion, there's another whistle that finally gets him to get moving, to get goodbye, to say goodbye to Moscow. So, I mean, if I can find another quote, it says, "Forever, that needs to be grasped." The master whispered and licked his. Here it says, "The master threw himself out of the saddle, left the mounted ones, and ran to the edge of the hillside. The black cloak dragged on the ground behind him. The master began to look at the city. In his first moments, a ringing sadness crept over his heart, but it very quickly gave way to a sweetish anxiety, a wondering, gypsy excitement. Forever, that needs to be grasped," the master whispered and licked his dry, cracked lips. He began to heed and take precise note of everything that went on in his soul. His excitement turned, as it seemed to him, into a feeling of deep and egregious offense. But it was unstable, vanished, and gave way for some reason to a haughty indifference and to a forced taste of enduring peace. The group of riders waited silently for the master. They were waiting for him for him to say goodbye to Moscow. So again, nothing but positive, I don't know, Moscow and Russia under Stalin look pretty positive to me. Again, I know there's gulags and that's what everybody focuses on, but reading Master and Margarita just makes me want to go to Moscow more than ever. I don't know if it's the same now as it was 100 years ago, but one of the cities I haven't been to. So yeah, Moscow Lit 2026 has gotten off to a excellent start, and long may it continue. Uh, and then I also, what I read, I buddy read this. This is Seamus Heaney's Beowulf. I buddy read this with Angelina. Her channel, Books Do Things to Me. We buddy read this. It's a short but a very epic poem about Beowulf. Basically, that period of European history between the rise of Christianity and the or not the rise of Christianity, but the coming of Christianity into the last corners of Europe, which was still heathen, that was still unchristianized, sort of northern Europe, kind of Scandinavia, and then an epic battle of good and evil, and how they transferred Beowulf from a story of good and evil that dealt with the old mythology, the old Norse mythology, the old and how it was reimagined or rewritten or retold with Christian elements, which creeps along. So you can tell that somebody had written it before, or it was the same story was repurposed for Christian propaganda, for lack of a better term. But this is the translation is excellent. Makes it very easy to read, very easy to understand. There's very helpful notes in this edition. I think Seamus Heaney won the Pulitzer for this translation. And yeah, well-known book, but a very fantastic one. I enjoyed buddy reading it with Angelina. I don't know if she's going to make a video about it on her channel. She might. If I remember, I'll link her channel. But yeah, lots of fun. And then the final two books is deals with Historathon Quarter 1. And Historathon Quarter 1 is to discuss books from antiquity, or not antiquity, from the beginning of time. Dinosaurs, before dinosaurs, the beginning of time, till the year 500 AD or CE. I've been focusing, if you saw last month, I've been focusing on the Punic people, or the Phoenicians, or what would later be called the Carthaginians, all really the same people who controlled the Mediterranean world for centuries and centuries until they were removed forcibly by the Roman Empire. The first book I read is by Muhammad Hassin Fantar. It's called Carthage, the Punic City. And this is a larger sort of picture book, but also with prose that discusses Carthage, what Carthage looked like, certain votive sort of structures. What else can we find here? There was some nice pottery. Yeah, this kind of stuff. And this was, I think, by a Tunisian. The publisher, I think, is a Tunisian one, and so it takes a very, because where Carthage was, Carthage, the Punic city, is modern day Tunisia. So this one really comes from an angle, a very pro-Carthaginian angle. And that was interesting to see, a bit different than a Western sort of angle, because Carthage is always interlinked with Rome and the Roman Empire and its eventual defeat to Rome. Well, not the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic. So yeah, it was a fun read. Again, not very long. So the only thing I had against this was, I think this was originally written in French. So this was translated, and that sort of affected the reading style. But again, it's a lot of images and a lot of sources that would otherwise not be used in other books about Carthage. And then, speaking of Carthage, this is the last book I read this month. This is Richard Miles' Carthage Must Be Destroyed, The Rise and Fall of an Ancient Civilization. And yeah, this is basically the story of Carthage from its rise to its fall. And Of course, anytime you speak about Carthage, Rome, as I mentioned, is always there. It's always you can't speak about Carthage without speaking about Rome. But what this book and many of the other books that you were reading, modern books about Carthage from the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years even, what you are seeing is a interpretation of Carthage, a new look at Carthage, a much more sympathetic look at Carthage. So, previously, again, we're talking about Western scholars would look at Carthage as this evil empire that the Romans banished, defeated, destroyed, annihilated. But what we're seeing in these modern books about Carthage, and Carthage doesn't go away as much as Rome tried to end it. People are still talking about it, still writing about it, still fascinated by it. And what we're seeing in these newer books is a much more sympathetic look at Carthage. Because most of the sources are Roman sources, Greek sources and Roman sources, and they were, the victors write history, and so they had a lot of propaganda. They spoke, their writing was very pro-Roman, therefore anti-Carthaginian. So these new historians, these much more modern histories, again, take a much more sympathetic look at this great civilization that started as Phoenicians in West Asia, moved into central Mediterranean and developed Carthage, really in the heart of the Mediterranean, and then later also reached all the way to Spain in the West. Just a grand maritime empire, and this is an excellent book, very well written. I have so many, well, not so many. I have about, like maybe eight books about Carthage. I think this one so far, it's the most recent one, but this one really covers it. I only need this. I don't think I need the other eight, but anyway, it was a fun read, and I was happy to read it. And yeah, that's it. Again, I don't know if I'm gonna post this video. I'm not really in the best of moods. Certain so-called statesmen in America and in the and they're let's just say they've put me in a depressing mood, and recent events has put me in a depressive mood. So yeah, I hope this kind of tried to lift my spirits up. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll stop nattering on. I'll end this. Thank you so much for watching this. Salute, BookTube.